about 9 years ago, I became very close to this old hermit who lived in the woods. His name was Kimball. We, through very synchronistic series of happenstances, found each other in the woods and came to love each other very much. And lots to say about Kimball. Kimball was the most intimate and close and curious and familiar with death more than anyone I've ever met. And yeah, and then his dying time came and he decided to choose medical aid in dying and instead of continue with the chemo process. And so, yeah, I inadvertently became his midwife, his unofficial doula in some ways, though at the time I had no idea about all of the logistical parts, like the advanced care directives and all of those pieces. I didn't know anything about that, but I did plan. We planned for his day, for his death, for months, and it was very planned and very intentional. And we processed our ideas about death together. We made all these plans for ritual. And then when the day came, I was with him when he took the medication and died. And we had a fire going for 3 nights when he died. And during that time, the words death doula came into my mind. And I, at the time, was living on his property in this little shack. And I went back to the shack and Googled death doula. I remember the exact moment. I Googled it and I was like, this is a real thing. And then I looked up trainings and there was a training in Seattle. And yeah, I went to the training. It was only a 3-day, it was an all-day, 3-day training with Anelda. And yeah, it was a full body yes. And as somebody who wants to do everything and has done so many different kinds of things, that's very rare for me to be like, oh, this is it. Like, I'm choosing this. I did not know what to do. Honestly, I was completely, if I could go back now, I would have handled it very differently. I was not doing any of the logistical stuff because that was out of my, plus it wasn't even in my consciousness, those kinds of things. Yeah. So his son was doing a lot of the more of the logistical parts with the paperwork and stuff. And I was just, had no idea. And all the other parts really came from Kimball. But Kimball was so close to death itself. So we talked about it and planned. We made I crafted all these things in preparation for the day. We wrote letters. We, had this whole day planned out. We also processed our lives together a lot. That was a big part of it. And it was really important for me at the time. It was really important for me to see up close him actually get close to his death in a physical way, because it would have been so much harder for me to fathom and process and accept his death if he was in his 60s, but he was very vivacious and very passionate, and if up until his final day, he was still his really vibrant, passionate self. He was, but he was in so much pain, and his cancer was very visible, and it was really hard to witness that. So the days leading up to his death, I kept wanting to prolong the day because I didn't want to let him go, but I just saw him in so much pain, and I saw his body. He was so uncomfortable. He couldn't sleep at night. It just, he was in too much pain. And it was so good for me to see that, so that I could accept that he needed to die, you know. I have noticed why it's really helpful to get up close to it and see it. And there are many, many cases in which somebody does die suddenly without that process. And it's so hard for that reason. We had so many rituals. I mean, we would read out loud to each other every night, and we finished the book. We were reading Hermann Hesse, and we finished it the day before he died, reading it out loud. And he lived in this home that he made himself with no electricity, no running water. It was just candles, you know, and there were some funny practical things. Like, he died in we called it his magic room. It was like up a really steep staircase that he made himself. And that made it very hard to carry his body down. But it was really so moving and so beautiful to experience a death in which we were surrounded by his garden, by all his flowers, by his space, by all his sacred things and his books and his writing, and for him to die in that space, it was just so beautiful. And there was a lot of humor. He was very funny. So the leading up to the moment when he took the medication, he had to get some last words in that were really funny. He was waiting for those moments to say. Word for word, he said, there's backstory to this, but he said, me and him were holding hands, you know, he's about to take it, and he goes, the rigmarole it takes for me to hold Sarafina's hand. Yeah, anyway, it's a long story because he always wanted to hold my hand, and yeah. There were just some comments like that. And yeah, we had all these little rituals, you know, we had these bells that we were ringing, and we each read a piece to each other out loud, a poetry that we'd written. He wanted us to share our beliefs about death, and he wanted to share his beliefs about death on his final day. And that was really beautiful. All these different ideas about like what's going to happen after this. And I actually made this, it was a type of wine that I made from orange and from lily flower. And in the process of making it, we had this intention that if we would just create a sign for each other, so that after he dies, I would do the sign and I could connect with him in the other world, you know, which hasn't actually worked, to be honest. But Kimball has shown up a lot for me in different moments, but not through that. The first thing that I felt, it was a beautiful, sunny day, right at the end of spring, beginning of summer. And I walked over from my shack. I was the first person he wanted to see, you know, and I walked over, and he had all these papers stacked up, and he had his like briefcase, and he had just made a call to his sister. He never had a cell phone until he was starting to get cancer, and he had to have one. But there's so many magical things. His sister, after Kimball chose his day of death, his sister got cancer and ended up dying the same time as Kimball, but in a completely different state. I mean, it's wild. So he called his sister and was like, I'll see you over there, you know? And I heard this phone call and I saw his bag, and he looked at me with this like rambunctious kind of twinkle in his eye. And I just felt like he was about to take the biggest adventure of his life. And I actually felt jealous because I wanted to go with him as an adventurer. I wanted to go with him, and I couldn't go. He was about to go to a place I have no idea about, you know? And I was seeing him in that moment, like, about to take off on his adventure, and I couldn't go with him. And I would just be left here having no idea what is over there. So I was kind of jealous, but it was also really sweet to see him. He was so ready. And his whole life, he was waiting for death. Like, he always longed to know what was on the other side and he was kind of excited, which is, is interesting. Yeah. A lot of other things happened. But yeah, that was the day. That was the day that I realized I would become a death doula. Yeah.